Good morning. Good morning. And welcome to this Sunday morning service of the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. My name is Abby Sessions. This morning I serve as worship associate for a service led by Carl Lindholm, a fellow member of this congregation, in honor of All Souls Eve, a time to appreciate our loved ones who have departed this life. Carl will lead us in remembrances of ancestors who have fascinated us, or inspired us, or nurtured us, ancestors who have left some kind of legacy or formed us in some way. We will hear briefly from Brett Millier, not in this order. Brett Millier, Marnie Wood, Rich Hennessy, Ann Webster, Martha Soderbergh, Alan Moore, and Richard Hopkins. And after that, maybe from you. We can only pass the mic 2 times today, but we hope there will be time for others to contribute from the pulpit. If there's not time, gather people around you after the service in our newly revived in-person coffee hour in the Ann Ross Fellowship Hall downstairs and tell your story there. Others who have contributed to making this multi-access service happen in person, on Zoom, and later on YouTube include our stream team of Rich Wolfson, Richard Hopkins, and Avi Freund on camera today, and Alan Moore on the soundboard, and Mary Hadley in the understudy position for taking over in the near future on the Zoom broadcast. Unfortunately, we do not have a stream team member to run the Zoom coffee hour after the service today. So there sadly will be no, Jordan Young. Jordan Young will run the Zoom coffee hour after the service today. So if you're on Zoom, stay tuned, and Jordan will get you to a breakout room for discussion. And if you're interested in learning how to host that event in the future, please be in touch with me. Whether you come every Sunday, occasionally, or are with us for the very first time, whether you're with us in person, on Zoom, or watching later via YouTube, we are glad to see you here at CVUUS. If you're watching from home, you can find the order of service on the CVUUS website and song lyrics in the chat. If this is your first time attending a service with us, please contact us so that we can tell you more about who we are and learn more about you. If you have a milestone or passage to share, please put it in the chat if you've not already sent it to Carl for sharing. And for those of you who are in the sanctuary, this would be a good time to turn off your cell phones. We strive to be a welcoming and active presence in our community, working together to build a world more beautiful, just, and compassionate. There are many ways and more all the time for us to connect with one another in fulfilling that mission and in enjoying one another's company. The best way to stay in touch with all the activities going on at CVUUS is to read the weekly email blast sent out on Wednesdays by Laura Sermily, our office manager. Here are a couple highlights I want to draw your attention to. We are in preparation mode for the Mexican consulate visit when the whole church fills up with people from our farms, generally, getting their needs met for clothing, food, documents. If you want to be involved, get in touch with Lise Anderson. And our Radical Love giveaway raffle is getting underway. We're going to have an online version of the Radical Love giveaway, so please watch for notices in the email blast for how you can get involved. Now, let us worship together. Our call to worship today is number 721 in the gray hymnal, written by Kathleen McTighe. in the struggles we choose for ourselves, in the ways we move forward in our lives and bring our world forward with us, it is right to remember the names of those who gave us strength in this choice of living. It is right to name the power of hard lives well lived. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into the dust, have not disappeared. They are with us still. The lives they lived hold us steady. Their words remind us and call us back to ourselves. Their courage and love evoke our own. We, the living, carry them with us. We are their voices, their hands, their hearts. We take them with us, and with them choose the deeper path of living. Now I'll call upon Carl to light the chalice. In your order of service, it's printed twice, but we will only be saying it one time. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us.
Well, thank you. Greetings. Good morning. I have to model brevity in this time for all ages because I've been asked, we have lots of contributors today, and I pressured them to be brief. So I want to talk a little bit about my ancestors, my Swedish ancestors, the Lindholms, the immigrant Lindholm family. I tried this out on my friend Rick yesterday, and I spoke for 20 minutes, and he fell asleep twice. So I'm trying to give you a tighter version. My father grew up Milton Lindholm in Waltham, Massachusetts. His mother worked in the watch factory there. His father had died when he was only a year old. And he had a summer school course in anthropology, and in the classroom, the teacher went around the room and examined the names of his students and came to Lindholm and said, "Oh, Lindholm is Swede. But you have a real name. You're not named Peterson or Larson or Olson or Johansson. So you come from a family that had status or wealth in Sweden." And my dad was quite proud. And then he came home and he told this to his mother. And his mother said, "Well, why don't you sit down, Milt?" And she told him the story of his grandfather, my great-grandfather, Carl, spelled with a C, of course, because the Swedes spell it with a C. I'm with a K. I asked my mother how that could happen to be, and she said, "We preferred it." So she said, "Your grandfather, Carl, when he entered the military in the 1860s in Sweden," yes, Sweden had a military, there were too many Olsons and Larsons and Johanssons and Carlsons. And so they allowed soldiers, in fact, they encouraged soldiers to choose another name. And so my great-grandfather chose the name Lindholm, which means roughly a place by a river where there's a linden tree. Place by the linden tree. And speculation in this wonderful genealogy that a friend of the family did for us just said, maybe he just was in the military and thinking about it, or had actually was thinking about an actual place. And so he got out of the military, and we were Lindholms from then on. He was, however, a shoemaker descended from farmers. There's not much wealth and status. And unfortunately, and this is a part of the tale I was going to get to later, he died at age 52, kind of a broken man, of apoplexy, the result of chronic alcoholism. So it's a sad story, actually, but my name, I'm descended from my great-grandfather Carl, who was the town drunk. So much for my noble heritage. Carl had 7 children. He married a lovely woman in Grebbestad, Sweden, named Charlotta, and he had 7 children. And between 1887 and 1889, they immigrated to America in 3 waves. Carl had a brother, John, who was living in Quincy, and encouraged them to come. Keep in mind, in the 1900 census, there were 40,000 Swedes living in Massachusetts. And there was a lot of manufacturing. And in Waltham, where they settled, there was a watch factory, where, as I mentioned, my grandmother worked. So Carl's second child was named Lambert. That's my grandfather, whom I never knew. As I mentioned, he died, but as my dad was just a little boy. And Lambert was a minister. He married Helen Isaacson. So Lambert died in 1912, the year after my father was born, and Helen and her children, her 3 children, my dad and his brother and sister, moved into a duplex with the Isaacsons, Helen's family, in Waltham. Now, we have these, Richard, do we have these slides? Sure. So I have just some images of this family. And then, of course, my connection to the Lindholm family is through my dad, so I'll talk a little bit about my dad, too. No, it's half of the slide, and actually this bottom half I need more. That's my grandmother. And mostly what I wanted, if we can get the whole slide, it looks like a slide, an image from a documentary by Ken Burns on immigrants. There we go. It's kind of small, but yeah, oh, thank you. And that's my dad. That's little Milton there. That's a sweet, and I don't know many others. That's my Uncle Herbert. That might be Connie, my dad's older sister. That's my grandmother there. I think that's my Aunt Alice, who lived in the duplex. But I looked at this in our family archive picture, and I said, as I said, it looks like the kind of the classic immigrant family, and it was. And that was probably, my dad was born in 1911, so that's probably 1912 or 13. And the next one, Richard, I have just 2 more, just for kind of the quality of that image. And I like the cars. And this is a family outing. Oh. No. I'm modeling brevity, so if I go a little long, it's Richard's fault. Perfect. And there's my dad. So he's probably about 15. So this would be in the early 20s, mid-20s. I like the cars. This is the family. I recognize a few others. Okay, next one, Richard. And here they are. They used to love to go to Nantasket, which is a beach down by Quincy. I don't know. I've never been to Nantasket. Where'd you go last week? Went down to Nantasket. So there's the family. My grandmother in front. She was a large woman. There's my dad's cousin Winifred, who lived next door in the duplex. And that's the patriarch of the Lindholm family, Gottfried Isaacson. And he lived on the other side in the duplex. And doesn't he look like a patriarch? And I don't know who that woman is with her head on my dad's lap, but it's not my mother. Next one, Richard. And this is how my dad decided to, this is how my dad felt that he became an American. He was one of those immigrant families that wanted to remove all traces of their ethnicity. They spoke nothing but Swedish in the home. When he first went to school, he could hardly speak English. And he decided, he fell in love with the game of football, and he was very frank and said, this was my means of assimilation, was football. He said, it also kept me from getting beat up by the Irish kids. And this was at Bates College, where he played football. Okay, Richard. And here he is with my mother. Now, I can do this, I want to do this very quickly. My mother grew up in Maine for many generations in Maine, and she was one of 12 children. And her father, she had means. Her father owned shoe factories, but he lost everything in the Depression. So my mother had to come back from Wheaton College, where she was a student, to become a day student at Bates College, where my dad was already a student. But my dad, 4 years older, had to work for 2 years to get enough funds to go to Bates, which is to say about $100, to go to Bates in 1931. So this picture is from 1935, 34 or 35. And my mom's story will wait for another day. Next one. I love this picture. This is my screenshot on my computer, but this is my dad in his first car when he was 24. He was quite proud of it. I think it's a Model A. Some of you may know exactly what it is. Last one, Rich. And my dad spent 40 years and lived for his whole adult life, except for a few years after college, in Lewiston, Maine, where he worked at Bates College, where he gained a great deal of respect over the ages. I lived somewhat in his shadow. The admissions building at Bates is called the Lindholm House, and I tell people it's because I was such a star, a hotshot in high school. They named a building at the college after me, but nobody is buying it. And so Milton always believed that he was the beneficiary of the American dream. Thank you. So now Ronnie is going to sing and play a tune that is suggested to me by Ted Shy, and it's very familiar to Brett and me. We should have thought of it ourselves because we listened to this in the car 1,000 times. Tom Chapin was our favorite singer for children. And this song, Family Tree, Ted Shy said, why don't you do this? And the lyrics are in your order of service, and they seem to me quite wonderful for this service. Ronnie.
For the days of Jello lived a prehistoric fellow who loved a maid and courted her beneath the banyan tree. They had lots of children, and they kept on having children. And all their children had children until one of them had me. We're a family and we're a tree. Our roots go deep down in history. From my great-great-granddaddy reaching up to me, we're a green and growing family tree. My grandpa came from Russia, and my grandma came from Prussia. They met in Nova Scotia, had my dad in Tennessee. Then they moved to Yokohama, where Daddy met my mama. Her dad's from Alabama, and her mom's part Cherokee. We're a family, and we're a tree. Our roots go deep down in history. From my great-great-granddaddy reaching up to me, we're a green and growing family tree. Well, one fine day I may go to Tierra del Fuego. Perhaps I'll meet my wife there and we'll move to Timbuktu. And our kid will be bilingual, and though she may say single, she could of course commingle with the king of Kathmandu. 'Cause we're a family and we're a tree. Our roots go deep down in history. From my great-great-granddaddy reaching up to me, we're a green and growing family tree. Folks in Madagascar are not the same as in Alaska. They've got different foods, different moods, and different colored skin. You may have a different name, but underneath we're much the same. You're probably my cousin, and the whole world is our kin. Oh, we're a family, and we're a tree. Our roots go deep down in history. My great-great-grandmother reaching up to me, we're a green and growing family tree. We're a green and growing family tree.
All right. Thanks, Ronnie. This is probably unwise, but I have to make one amendment to my presentation about my immigrant family. I wanted to focus on a particular individual that I didn't neglect at all, and that was my great-grandfather Carl's wife, Charlotta. And Charlotta, of course, I never knew. Charlotta is a fascinating person to me because she and Carl had 7 children, and Charlotta never came to the United States because she was not terribly well after the birth of her 7th child. So the family had to make the trip from their small town to Grebbestad, Sweden, to Gothenburg, Sweden on the coast, then take a boat to Liverpool, and then take a boat to Boston. Charlotta got as far as Gothenburg, and they wouldn't let her on the boat. So she stayed in Sweden and sent her 7 children and her husband to the United States. So I find that a poignant story. It was meant to be kind of the centerpiece of my presentation, but there you go. Thank you for indulging me. Time for the offering. The offering this month, our donee this month is Habitat for Humanity. I think most of us are quite familiar with their work. We had an excellent presentation by Muffin Carruthers on October 10th. So to be generous, those of you who are here in the sanctuary, you can place your offering in the basket now or at the end of the service. And those of you at home on Zoom, you have the routine too, which I think you know well yourself. We have 2 milestones and passages that I've been given today, and the first is from Dale Birdsall, who writes, "We have just returned from 2 wonderful weeks in Oregon to see our 3 sons who live there, Jeff, Ben, and Alex. But the main reason for our visit was to be there for our only grandchild, Alex's daughter, Evelyn. Was to be there for our only grandchild, Alex's daughter, Evelyn's 2nd birthday. So congratulations, Dale. Sounds like a great trip. Also a note from Pat Todd. I have just learned that the implantation of a fertilized egg for my grandson's wife has been successful. They hope to have their baby early next summer. Not only are we grateful for the science that made this possible, but for the generosity of the woman who offered to be the surrogate mother. As we often say, blessed be. We have a long time to go before a live birth, but the doctors are pretty positive that the surrogate is able to carry to term with no problems. So congratulations to your family, Pat. Now at this point we will have a couple of minutes of prayer and meditation, after which Ronnie will lead us out with a little music.
Our first reading today is Breaths, which you may recognize as a song sung by Sweet Honey and Rock, with music by Isaac Barnwell and lyrics by Duro Diop. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestor's breath in the voice of the waters. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the rustling trees. They are in the groaning woods. They are in the crying grass. They are in the moaning rocks. The dead are not under the earth. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead have a pact with the living. They are in the woman's breast. They are in the wailing child. They are with us in our homes. They are with us in this crowd. The dead have a pact with the living. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters.
You have a paperback book from way back. This is what happens. You turn the page and it comes out. My reading is from Thomas Wolfe's Look Homeward Angel. Anybody read Look Homeward Angel but me? Read it? Okay. I taught a course when I was teaching in secondary schools, we read Look Homeward Angel, which is 540 pages of very small print. Wolfe wrote effusively and rhapsodically and always at the top of his voice. And I had a little bit of a Thomas Wolfe period, as I said, because he had a fascinating biography. He only lived to be 37 years old, but one person said he kind of died of old age. He lived so furiously. Malcolm Cowley said he wanted to pour out everything he remembered in one torrential flood. And he wrote kind of stream of consciously and influenced other writers of that sort. The very beginning, the first page of Look Homeward Angel, I'll read a few lines from it, just blew my mind, and it continues sort of in that vein. He talks about his family coming from England to the United States and settling ultimately in Asheville, North Carolina. Some of you may have seen his home there. He calls it Altamont in this reading, in his book. Very autobiographical novel, his first one, Look Homeward Angel. A destiny that leads the English to the Dutch is strange enough, but one that leads from Epsom into Pennsylvania and then into the hills that shut in Altamont over the proud choral cry of the cock and the soft stone smile of an angel is touched by that dark miracle of chance which makes new magic in a dusty world. Each of us is all the sums he has not counted. Subtract us into nakedness and night again, and you shall see begin in Crete 4,000 years ago the love that ended yesterday in Texas. The seed of our destruction will blossom in the desert. The election of our cure grows by a mountain rock, and our lives are haunted by a Georgia slattern because a London cut purse went unhung. Each moment is the fruit of 40,000 years. The minute-winning days, like flies, buzz home to death, and every moment is a window on all time. Now do that for not 540 more pages and you get a sense of Wolfe. Thank you. Are we doing reflections now? Okay. Would you light a candle for your reflecting person?
I wonder how many of you saw the obituary in the Addison Independent this week for Bill James of Bristol, who was 110 years old, and it had a list of his great-great-grandchildren. I just think that's wonderful. I was lucky enough to know 5 of my grandmothers as I was growing up. 4 of them... Closer? Okay, thank you. 4 of them lived until I was out of college, and one of them lived until as long as it took me to get all the way to Vermont. She visited me here. These are all vivid characters, now my ancestors, and I still love to say all of their names. Jenny Marie Lucas Millier, Lottie May Hanson Millier Mitchell, Grace Sperry Hill, Annie Lorraine Candlish Hill, and Alexandra Victoria McGowan Candlish Rhodes. Of these grandmothers and great-grandmothers, Allie Rhodes, the last, was my favorite, although it was Jenny Millier who gave us, it was my father's grandmother, Jenny Millier, who gave us this timeless piece of wisdom. If you want to be a nice old lady, you have to start early. But Allie McGowan's ancestors were loyalists in the American Revolution, and they were given land grants in the English townships of Quebec in exchange. They settled in Georgeville, which is on the shore of Lake Memphremagog, just a few miles north of Newport, Vermont. Allie McGowan grew up in the boarding house her family ran for fishermen and pleasure boaters on the lake, and to this day, one can sail or paddle or motor or drive to what is now the Maison McGowan and have a wonderful meal and spend the night if you want to. But Allie was restless, and at 19, she took a job as a governess with a family that was moving to settle in Southern California. And she headed west and never went back. Eventually, she met and married Harold Candlish there, but lost him in the 1918 flu epidemic. She was a widow with 2 small children who nonetheless attracted the attention of a former Major League Baseball pitcher named Robert Barton, or otherwise known as Dusty Rhodes, clearly the most famous member of our family by far. Dusty Rhodes had settled in the desert after he'd retired from Major League Baseball. But Dusty was old and deaf by the time I knew him, but Grandma Rhodes, as we knew her, was vivid and exciting. She had a little tiny house in downtown Barstow, California, where both my parents grew up, and she was a passionate gardener. She kept there in the desert. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Barstow, but it's really the desert. She kept a perfect, beautiful English cottage garden right downtown in Barstow, California, with hollyhocks and foxglove and sweet William and clematis and all those plants you might grow in an English cottage garden. And neighbors and tourists would walk or drive by just to see the garden. She was a lifelong Anglophile, as many people from the English townships of Quebec are. And she got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch the wedding of Diana and Prince Charles in 1981. But she was skeptical enough of the whole thing to repeat the joke about how they should name their first child Up so they could be Up, Chuck, and Die. She had a sense of humor, too. She served tea with delicious little butter cookies at 4 o'clock every day in her living room in the little house on Williams Street in Barstow, California, the window shades pulled against the glare and heat of the desert. We felt invited into another world when we were invited for tea, and it was there I learned about life in New England. I have always wanted to tell her where I ended up.
Good morning. I'm Marnie Wood, and I grew up in California, San Diego to be exact. And while I was growing up, I was made aware that my mother's family, the Dill family roots, were actually on Cape Cod. Never in my wildest imaginings would I think that one day I would live in New England. I dropped in to visit my sister in 1983, and I've been here ever since. In July of 1995, I had an invitation to stay in Eastham on the Cape and realized that we would be in the town of my ancestors. Discovering the Eastham Historical Society's archives was a deep pleasure, as it contained access to my family's roots in multiple layers. Reading the town's history, I discovered that my great-great-great-grandfather, Captain Michael Collins, was the first lightkeeper at Nauset Beach in the town of Eastham. Interestingly, a number of sources state very clearly that he had agitated in the 1820s for navigational aids, lighthouses, to be established, as they were much needed along the ocean shoreline as well as in Cape Cod Bay, where sandbars were the cause of many shipwrecks. 1922 saw the building of Billings Gate Light in Cape Cod Bay on an island that is no longer there. It took until 1838 before his petitions to the government came to fruition, and 3 towers were built above the Atlantic at Nauset Beach. These 3 lights would distinguish that long shoreline. If you think of the arm of the Cape, it's along here. There was 1 light at Truro, there were 2 towers at Chatham, and so 3 towers were erected at Nauset Beach. They would broadcast beacons to warn the ships off the coast. The towers became known as the 3 Sisters of Nauset. One of the reasons that my great-great-great-grandfather, Captain Collins, had so much resistance was that shipwrecks meant cargo to salvage. And so finally, 20 other backers of establishing the lights, along with my ancestor, were successful. And then Captain Collins became the first keeper of these lights, and he was the keeper from 1838 through to 1865. The dark coast became safer waters due to his persistence and diligent advocacy. I was pleased to realize that the well-known gentleman, Ralph Waldo Emerson, visited Eastham and actually met with Captain Collins. Emerson noted the following: Collins, the keeper, told us he found resistance to the project of building a lighthouse on this coast, as it would injure the wrecking business. The stamina my ancestor apparently had to not back down when others did not like his ideas for greater safety for ships is a testament to his ability to persevere. Michael Collins was born in 1794 and lived to be 92 years old. His gravestone, as of this year, now bears a special plaque from the Nauset Light Preservation Society, honoring him as one of the keepers of the light at Nauset Beach. Some or many of you may have been to Nauset Beach, where 1 tower has now stood since 1923. The original 3 brick towers were lost to the erosions of the cliff, the erosion of the cliffs, and subsequently 3 wooden towers were built. They are preserved in a small park near the current tower. And if you've seen the current tower, or if you haven't, think of the Cape Cod potato chip bag, because that's the lighthouse that stands there now. Captain Collins' grandson was my great-grandfather, Albert Freeman Dill. And that gentleman sailed all over the world. He was captain of a number of ships, and he retired to San Diego, where he became the first harbor pilot. And that's why I'm from San Diego rather than Cape Cod. My own advocacy work for end-of-life choice, I feel I owe somewhat to my ancestors.
Hello, hello. Hello, there we go. Hi, Martha.
Hi, I'm Martha Soderbergh. What? Oh, I'm Martha Soderbergh, and I'm going to talk about somebody that I found because I got addicted to my ancestry during the pandemic, and I mean addicted. So I found a witch in my family, a real bona fide witch, and her name was Judith Varlet, or Varleth, and she was born in 1629 and died in 1711, but she came over to America with her father and the whole family in 61 and settled excuse me, in Hartford, Connecticut. And in 62, she was accused of being a witch because she said some disturbing words to a child. And she was convicted. But, ta-da, Peter Stuyvesant was the governor, and he came along and acquitted her. And not only that, ta-da, his brother-in-law married her. And if you want to hear the best news of all, we share a birthday. So happy birthday, Judith. You're only 392 years older than me.
My name's Alan Moore, and the ancestor I'm going to talk about is not someone I particularly admire, nor have I been inspired by. Although, if I had lived in colonial times, I might have been inspired by her. She's easily the most famous, perhaps even notorious member of my family. Her name was Hannah Dustin, and she is a distant relative on my mother's side of the family and is fairly well known in some circles. Her story has certainly been passed along in my family. Has anybody ever heard of Hannah Dustin? Ah. I think we're related. Oh, really? In the late 1600s and early 1700s, the French recruited disgruntled Indian groups to attack the colonists on the British colonial frontier. Hannah Dustin lived with her husband and 3 kids in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which at that time was very much was a small village on the colonial frontier in Massachusetts. And one day in 1697, you know this story, a group of Indians, probably Abenakis, I hate to say, attacked Haverhill, burned the houses, killed a bunch of people, and kidnapped Hannah Dustin, her baby, and another woman. They were taken north into New Hampshire, and along the way, Hannah's baby was killed, probably because it was a pain in the butt to travel with. After a week or so of travel, the Indians let down their guard, and one night, Hannah and another woman managed to obtain some tomahawks and killed 10 Indians, and also scalped them. They then returned to Massachusetts, where they were met and acclaimed as heroes. The Massachusetts General Assembly gave Hannah 50 pounds as bounty for the scalps she brought back, and for a while, Hannah was a regional, if not a national hero. In the early 1800s, she was again recognized as a hero and role model as Americans moved westward, and annihilating Indians was again something of a priority. So much so that 2 statues have been erected of Hannah Dustin in the 1800s, commemorating her actions more than a century before that. One was erected in New Hampshire, where she killed and scalped the Indians, and another one in Haverhill, Massachusetts. They're still there. They were the first statues ever erected honoring a woman in the United States. It's hard to believe, but well, actually it's not. No. In today's social environment, Hannah's actions are not considered as admirable as they were back then. And in both cases, commissions have been formed to decide what to do about these statues. I guess I feel that the statue should remain, not just because she's a distant relative, but I think that they commemorate an interesting event in our history, which unfortunately, was probably not unique. And I think that the statue should remain, but we should have added historical and social context that would describe why the Indians did what they did and why Hannah did what she did. It's interesting to consider what we would have done if we had been in her place at that time in history. Especially in the context of what's going on today.
Hello, I'm Ann Webster. I use these to see all of you, and I use these to see what I've written. But y'all look great. So when Carl put out the intriguing request to share stories about an ancestor who may have inspired us or otherwise had an impact on who we are today, it was hard for my mind not to go shooting off in several different directions. For me, I grew up with and heard stories about the many strong women in my family, which I am sure helped shape how I perceive the world today. But as I reflected deeper, it was not the stories of strong women that had the most impact on my feelings today, but the story of a 3.5-year-old boy who went missing. The boy, Bobby John, was the twin brother of my Aunt Betty. The story of Bobby John disappearing was front and center in our family. But I must admit, as a young child, I never paid much attention or realized the trauma of this loss. A large picture of the cute blonde-haired boy hung in my grandparents' home. I knew he was the missing boy, and I knew he was my aunt's twin. Life went on as usual, and although no one shied away from talking about the sudden disappearance, everyone shied away regarding their feelings around the event. Or maybe that was just around the youngest of us children. Missing has no closure. Your absence is noticed. Someone is looking for you or clinging to the hope of a resolution long after any hope should exist. A young family lives on what is called the Old Nash Farm, next to the New Haven River. The mother is in the yard, digging up perennials to store in the root cellar over winter. Her twins are playing together near her, and their cheeks growing rosy from the cool November air. Picking up her basket of vulnerable bulbs, she hollers to the children to follow her inside. The children do not follow. When she returns, Betty is in the yard, but Bobby John is not. As I got older, I noticed more nuanced messages around the event. A body was never found. Did Bobby drown? Was he abducted? Did he wander off in a different direction than the river? Why never any sign of this child? A cousin looked up articles in the local library from the then local newspaper. As I read several page spread of the missing boy, I also saw the pictures included with the article and witnessed how a whole town came together to search, to support, to try and carry some of the ache of these young parents. Years later, my Aunt Catherine, who was Betty's younger sister, told me when she was a teen and had earned her driver's license, it became her responsibility to drive her father wherever he needed or wanted to go. She confided, even 25 years later, it was not unusual if in their travels they crossed any part of the New Haven River or its tributaries. My grandfather would have her pull over and wait while he walked up and down the edge of the river searching for any sign of Bobby John. My Aunt Betty died at the age of 86. And while writing her obituary, we realized that Bobby John, because he had only been missing, had never been included in any family member's obituary as someone who had predeceased them, not even his parents. We included Betty's twin in her obituary, and on the back of my grandparents' headstone, it reads, "Our son, Robert John, drowned in the New Haven River, born May 18th, 1915, died November 19th, 1918. Ancestors are our DNA. Their stories live in our bodies, even if the details are not. My brother, who was named after the missing child, now owns and lives in the family home where he continues to display the picture of the cute blonde boy on the living room wall. By attributing a cause of death and acknowledging Betty's twin predeceased her was symbolically putting him to rest. But in our hearts, Bobby John is still missing.
Good morning, I'm Rich Hennessy, and this is a story about Sam Fogel, who was a notable member of this congregation. No, Sam was not my ancestor, but our esteemed friend. I first met Sam at the Peace Vigil, which used to be held each Saturday morning in downtown Middlebury. He was the son of a Lithuanian rabbi. His family eventually immigrated to Montreal, Canada, as a result of the Nazi oppression. Mary Lou Bright tells of Sam as a young boy, expanding his social consciousness beyond his Jewish faith. Some of his beliefs were in tune with the Society of Friends, that is, the Quakers, and the liberal Unitarian Universalist principles. Sam moved to Vermont and eventually settled in Middlebury. He also attended Haverhill, the Quaker meeting, and CVUUS. Here, Sam spoke insightfully during Joys and Concerns about the needs of people around the world. He encouraged us to act justly in response to these. Sam told me that he endeavored to be a citizen of the world. Throughout the years, Sam was gathering his ideas with regard to empathy and social justice. This became what Sam called his theory of compassion. I treasure the times when Sam invited me to listen and comment on the refinements of his manuscript, as I'm sure he did with several other friends. Here are the words from his published book. Wait not till you feel compassion to do compassion. Do compassion so that you and others will feel compassion.
We are running a little over, but I hope that it's tolerable. And I think Richard Hopkins has a very compelling story to tell us too, and then we'll sing our last hymn and be on our way.
Good morning, y'all. I'm the product of a mixed marriage. The New England part of my heritage is through my mother, and that's why I'm here. But the other half of my heritage is from Virginia and Maryland. And this is on my mind because we're going to a cousin's funeral in Gloucester County, Virginia, next weekend, which Gloucester County being my father's home county along Chesapeake Bay. This story is really about events that happened 200 years ago when my great-great-great-uncle Johns left the farm in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and went to Baltimore to work for his uncle Jared, who was a Baltimore merchant. And of course, Johns went on to become a very successful merchant himself, a real estate developer and investor in the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and eventually a philanthropist, and left most of his estate to the university and the hospital that bear his name. In the 18th century, the Hopkinses and their relatives in Anne Arundel County were slave-owning Quakers, raising tobacco in the fertile soil of southern Maryland. In the 1780s and 90s, somewhere in there, the local Friends meetings came to the conclusion that owning slaves was not compatible with being a good person or being a Quaker, and they put pressure on their members to free their slaves. The Johns Hopkins that became the philanthropist, his grandfather was also Johns, and his grandfather Johns was threatened with expulsion from the meeting if he didn't take steps to free his slaves. And so he did put them on, he did manumit his slaves. It meant putting them on a schedule to be released on certain dates in the future. And by the time the original Johns Hopkins died, he still had 14 enslaved persons in his household that hadn't yet been manumitted. So the family story is that when the farm no longer had slave labor, the younger people in the family had to go off to seek their fortune, and in fact, Johns Hopkins and several of his brothers moved to Baltimore to become merchants during that time. The family story is that Johns Hopkins was an abolitionist. There's actually no evidence in the historical record for this being true. Relatively recently, historians who've been combing through the census records for Baltimore have determined that Johns Hopkins' household included several enslaved people in 1840 and again in 1850, which would, you could be an abolitionist and own slaves, I guess, but it would be a bit of cognitive dissonance to do that. So Johns Hopkins had no children. The story is that he fell in love with his cousin, and he was not allowed to marry his cousin and never married. He had several brothers that he was in business with. One of his brothers died quite young and left 4 young children, 4 boys. And Hopkins was generous towards his sister-in-law and to these 4 boys. And In his will, although he left the bulk of his money for the hospital and the college, he left some money to relatives, and my great-grandfather Jared took his inheritance from his Uncle John's and bought a farm in Tidewater, Virginia, a 600-acre farm. The land was cheap this is in the mid-1870s. Land was cheap in Tidewater, Maryland, and Virginia after the Civil War. And he bought a 600-acre farm, rented as a general farm. He was a progressive, innovative farmer. And my grandfather, Snowden, took over most of the farm and was also an innovative and assertive farmer. The farm was run largely with the day labor of African-American men and women who lived in the Rising Sun community across the highway from the River's Edge farm. And that community is still there. My father certainly knew many, many African-American people by name, by first name primarily, as colored people who were members of their community. But the farm really depended on the labor of these freed slaves and their children and grandchildren. Eventually, as the generations went by, the farm was subdivided over and over again and sold off. And eventually, at this point, in 2021, there hasn't been there's not been any of the land in that farm belonging to members of my family. It's all been subdivided up. So I personally did not inherit any money or property from this family enterprise. I did inherit a general sense of belonging, perhaps of privilege, that focus on hard work and on education. My father was born in 1908, and he and his three siblings all went to college, which was not common in Virginia in the 1920s. I certainly came away from this family tradition with a sense of the importance of hard work and of education. One thing I failed to say just a moment ago is that my grandfather and his father, who are the owners of this property, worked really, really hard next to their hired labor. I mean, they were not sitting in the drawing room watching other people do the work. So I wish I knew more of the stories of the Rising Sun community people who worked on my grandparents' farm. I'm just totally disconnected from that. Perhaps when we go to Gloucester next week, I'll be able to reconnect in some way. Thanks.
Nicely done, choir. Thank you. Isn't it wonderful to have a little choir back? Thank you to all who participated in this service, the tech people and those who spoke. Benediction today is by a UU minister, Reverend Leah Derlin Jones from Charlottesville, Virginia. Inspired by our ancestors. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love. As we go forth from this time and place, let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work of living boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven on earth. Amen, and blessed be.